Well, everyone, welcome back for another episode of Reimagining Cyber Extra. I'm Rob Borrego. I'm joined by my co-host, as usual, Stan Wisserman. There's always so much going on in cyber, right, Stan? And so one of the things that I know you just kind of got a little bit in depth on and want to share is some of the things that's going on in the federal sector. So why don't we kind of kick off and share, what is it that we're seeing coming into the new year?
Rob, if you recall in our episode with Louis Lerman a few weeks back, and when we were talking about healthcare security and the high trust certification process, he referenced FedRAMP several times.
Yes.
And he was making a comparison between what you have to do in FedRAMP and the purpose of FedRAMP versus high trust. But I don't think we've covered FedRAMP in any of our previous episodes. So our listeners may not be familiar with that program. And I just wanted to spend a little time, ensuring that folks understand what FedRAMP is, and as well as some of the updates that are going on. It's an 11-year program, and it's called the Federal Risk and Authorization Management Program. And it's run out of GSA, the General Services Administration here in the United States. And its whole purpose is to provide a standardized government-wide approach to security assessment, authorization, and continuing monitoring of cloud products and services used by the federal government agencies. If you recall, when the cloud computing got it introduced, the whole question was, how was the federal government and these agencies going to safely and securely use cloud? And this was the answer. FedRAMP was the answer. And as an example, as far as our own services, Fortify on Demand is a managed service that is FedRAMP authorized, right? So that's an example of one of those that we have, and it's been long-standing. We've had that authorization for a number of years. And I think with any metric, the FedRAMP program has been viewed as successful for accelerating the adoption of secure cloud solutions for use by public sector agencies. So it has been a successful program. And as a way of sort of reflecting that success, they've sort of codified it now. So one of the things that's happened as an update in the FY23 National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA, was signed by President Biden in December, that codified into law the FedRAMP program. And this is a big milestone for FedRAMP, and it's been updated as well. I mean, one of the things that they tried to address in this new law that's part of NDAA is some of the challenges with the authorization process, which can be a little onerous, right? And it can take a while to get through. And
definitely,
sometimes you feel like you're doing duplicative work. So some of the things they're trying to do is like reduce the duplication of security assessments and other obstacles that the agencies are facing when they're adopting cloud products, and have this presumption of adequacy for cloud technologies that have already received FedRAMP certification. So that, again, should reduce some of the redundancy of some of the work that's been done.
So really kind of simplifying some of these aspects and streamlining the process, right? Because that has been a bit of a thorn in the side of many different vendor organizations in the past.
And one of the other changes was to, look at this secure centralized repository and reuse existing assessments before you conduct your own.
Right.
I mean, again, sort of like a direction of don't do it again if you don't have to. And GSA has been directed to automate some of the processes. And again, some of these security assessments and continuous monitoring have been pretty manually intensive. And so automating that process and hopefully streamlining it and making it a little more efficient on both sides of the equation, from the agency perspective as well as the vendor trying to get through the process, is big. And finally, the other thing I just want to point out is they did establish this Federal Secure Cloud Advisory Committee. And the point of that is to have a dialogue between GSA, which runs the program, the different agencies, cybersecurity and procurement officials, and industry, to have this, kind of coordination to help, again, continue to mature the program. It's been in place for 11 years. It's already had a lot of maturity. But, let's continue that dialogue of all the different players involved to make sure that it's going to become more efficient. I think all these are very positive developments for the FedRAMP program.
It's good to hear. Now, out of curiosity, was there any update as it related to SBOM? Because there was a lot of back and forth.
There was, if you recall, there was a lot of back and forth. They were trying to actually include SBOM language. So again, that's, software bill of materials. We've actually, covered that in a number of our episodes as far as around the whole secure software supply chain, risk management. We've had John Pescatore back then with SolarWinds. We had, Steve Springett, and Dan Lawrence talking about SALSA and SBOM. So we've talked about this for a while, but in the past, it's all been around the executive order that Biden put out at the beginning of last year, as well as guidance that was coming out from industry and government. They were going to codify in law in this NDAA that vendors were going to have to provide an SBOM in order to have agencies consume their products.
Yeah.
And a number of tech trade groups like the Alliance for Digital Innovation really were urging the House and Senate Armed Services Committees to remove that language, because they just didn't feel we were ready yet. That the government and industry needed more time to work out the solutions and improve their supply chain security and ensure that they can actually generate and consume these SBOMs. So I think, they listened and they removed that language, but I don't think that's really stopped the executive branch from continuing to execute on Biden's executive order.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, again, it's been a bit of conflict, if you will, back and forth, kind of both sides discussing, the approach to SBOMs and whether or not there's known to be validity behind it, but then there's a question of, is there too much of a cyber kind of opening the Komodo, and we're giving too much information out. So that conversation will continue, but I do believe at some point in time it will be probably likely part of this as well, right?
Yeah, and NIST is continuing, and as well as Dr. Alan Freeman over at CISA, they're continuing to work on the SBOM stuff and guidance. So I think the crystal ball is, if you are a software supplier to the government, you have to be prepared in the future to be able to provide this kind of inventory of components that make up your software build, right? It's important, as we've heard from Steve and others, to be able to react quickly to 0 days, to be able to understand what your software consists of, to be able to mitigate open source security issues and risks. Right. So, you're going to have to be prepared to be able to share this information with those that are asking for it.
Yeah. And I think, we've seen some of that direct, obviously impacting us and how we develop and deliver our own software, but also on the customer kind of engagement side of things, where if we turn the clock way back to Log4j and looking at one of our, I would say, more mature customer in the area of software security, within a very short period of time, I believe it was maybe 3 business days, they were able to identify exactly which of their assets truly were impacted that they need to focus their attention on, and in essence, remove all that noise. And then on the flip side, you look at other organizations that had to go through months, and they're still in some cases kind of digging out of where does it actually impact us, right? So I think that kind of piece of that, visibility and understanding of where these things are and what they're baked into is of good value, but it's also how are you actually leveraging it appropriately, so that when the time comes to be able to action it, you do have all the information ready to go, as opposed to the whole kind of, now let's go and scramble and find it.
Right. And, I think as Steve Springett pointed out to us, though, SBOMs in and of itself aren't really the golden ticket, as it were. That's a part of that whole puzzle of software supply chain risk management. And yet another industry set of guidance on how to do it right was released. Microsoft got into this game, a long time ago. They have their own issues as far as supply chain, and they've been managing those risks for a long time. And so they have now shared their approach, and it's called the Secure Supply Chain Consumption Framework. And you ready for another acronym?
Here we go.
S2C2F. Doesn't exactly roll off the tongue. I'm not sure how they say that, but
I'm a little shocked at that, because didn't they look to see that Google called it SALSA and made it pretty easy?
Exactly. So, it's interesting you mentioned salsa because, that's what we talked to Dan Lawrence about, right?
Right.
Was salsa, the Google approach. But, the difference is this S2C2F is more of a consumption focused framework as opposed to the development or producer side.
Okay.
So you can look at salsa as being complementary to what Microsoft has done or what they've released here. So the idea is designed to protect developers from accidentally consuming malicious and compromised packages and helping them, mitigate supply chain risk by decreasing consumption-based attack surfaces. So, this has gotten some endorsements. The Open SSF has, adopted it. Their supply chain integrity working group has a SIG that's focused on using this. And so, Microsoft is doing what they can to help the industry and help organizations mitigate their consumption of potentially risky components. And that's great that they've released it and gotten open SSF support. So kudos to them.
Excellent. I mean, it just seems like everything that we're talking about in cyber always somehow turns itself back around to the software aspect of it, right? The software supply chain is the common theme that we heard through last year. It's not going to slow down this year. It's going to continue to be kind of this evolution of people becoming more mature in their program and how they're able to support that, understands more of the risks outbound as well, right? I think there's kind of this cascading effect of it's not just the vendors you're working with, it's also who are the vendors actually working with as other third parties and aspects of, software elements they may be pulling into their own end result they bring to market. So, we'll probably pick up on this as we go forward. I think it's a key topic as it relates to some of the common themes that we're going to be likely to see in 2023. God knows we change so quickly, so that can easily go away next month, right? But it just seems like that's going to continue to accelerate itself.
Well, you mentioned the prevalence of software. Software is everywhere, and you're bringing up the different components and interactions. I mean, APIs is another aspect of this that
absolutely
is so is rising as an attack surface and attack vectors that are hitting applications, and the organizations out there are just now becoming aware of this new attack surface that they have to control. But that's due partly because of the way in which development has evolved, and you have all these microservices and all these different interactions now between software components, which is great, but that's also an opportunity for bad actors to use that as a vector into your application or backend databases and systems. And so I think that's another aspect that we have to possibly focus on. So I would love to get a speaker from Microsoft on, the S2C2F. I got to get this right, man. I got to come up with it.
Why wouldn't you say it?
It'd be good to have somebody on that or on something on API security. I think it'd be a good
both,
topic to come up.
API security, to your point, though, I mean, it has just exploded, right, on what we're seeing out there with organizations just trying to kind of get their arms wrapped around it. It was something they weren't paying attention to. Now, that being said, it's not going to slow down by any means, right? Because one of the things, and again, this is something we'll carry on to maybe a follow-on extra episode or even bring in a guest for, is one of the things that we're seeing more and more desire for is the kind of open platform ecosystem-based model, meaning that, there's all this great technology, as we know, out there, but we need to also kind of take into account how can these things be more open from an integration perspective. So, for example, a managed security service provider, it's not necessarily where they're taking kind of their packaged offerings to market any longer. They have to be very much customized in how they're going to support the organizational needs of their customers. And to do so, right, they have to work with different technology investments they already have in place, the customer already has in place, take those on, but be able to integrate them effectively to be able to kind of paint that overarching picture as to delivering the service with the proper viewpoints as what's going on, what do we have to actually deal with today. And again, that was a key theme actually of something that I was involved with recently that I think is just, again, going to explode this upcoming year. There's much more need for that type of visibility. So Stan, great discussion again. As always, I love the federal perspective, but it always comes back in also to the overarching view of what we're seeing out there, and that software supply chain aspect is is just not slowing down. So good discussion. On to the next extra episode, on to the next guest. And if anyone is listening who would like to join us in the conversation on API security or more information about what Microsoft is doing as an example, please reach out to us. Let us know. We'd love to talk to you about that.
That would be great. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, everyone.